Darkcast Network. Out of the shadows comes the best of indie podcasts. Brian Randall Shaffer was an American medical student at the Ohio State University College of Medicine who had been missing since the early hours of April 1st, 2006, after security cameras recorded him just outside the bar in Columbus. He had gone out with some friends earlier in the evening on March 31st to celebrate the beginning of spring break. Then later, he was separated from them, and they assumed that he had gone home. The security camera outside the entrance to the second-floor bar recording him briefly talking to two women just before 2 a.m., and then walked off screen, without any further evidence of him leaving the area. Columbus police have several theories on what happened to him. Shaffer's disappearance is especially puzzling, since investigators there have no publicly accessible entrance or exit to the bar at that time. Some interest and suspicion has been directed to a friend of Shaffer's who accompanied him that night, but he has also refused to take a polygraph test regarding the incident. While foul play has been suspected, including the possible involvement of the purported smiley-face serial killer, it has been speculated that he might be alive and well and living under a new identity. My name is DJ, and this is the Mythical True Crime Podcast. Hello and welcome to tonight's show. Before I jump into the main story, I just wanted to let you know that I've updated my Patreon tiers, so now all subscribers on Patreon get early access to these shows. Normally I upload every Saturday morning, but these could be as early as Wednesday availability. The audio uploaded there is unedited and doesn't have any sponsors or promotions, so if you'd like to hear those in advance of anybody else, please consider subscribing. Alright, now back to the show. Brian Shaffer grew up in Pickerington, Ohio, a suburb outside of Columbus, the elder of Randy and Renee Shaffer's two sons. He graduated from a local high school in 1997 and went on to Ohio State University as undergraduate work. 6 years later, he graduated with a degree in microbiology. Following that, Shaffer began studies at OSU's College of Medicine in 2004. During his second year there, in March 2006, his mother died of myelodysplasia, which is a cancer of the blood and bone marrow. Shaffer's friend say although that he appeared to be handling it well, her death was especially hard for him. During his time at medical school, Shaffer had become romantically involved with another medical student there, named Alexis Wagoner. She, along with her his family and friends, believed that Brian would have probably been proposing to her later in 2006, most likely on the trip to Miami the couple had planned to take for spring break. Tropical locations such as Miami attracted Shaffer. He liked the relaxing lifestyles there. He told his friends that despite his decisions to pursue a medical career, his real ambition was to start a band playing music in the vein of Jimmy Buffett. On March 31st, Friday, classes at OSU ended in the spring break following week. Shaffer and his father, Randy, celebrated the occasion by having a steak dinner earlier that evening. Shaffer's father noted that he seemed exhausted from having studied throughout the night earlier in the week, cramming for some critical upcoming exams. He did not think Shaffer had gone out with his friend, William Clint Florence, later that night, as he was planning to do, but he didn't express his reservations to his son. At 9 p.m., Shaffer met Florence at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a bar in South Campus Gateway Complex on High Street in Columbus. An hour later, Shaffer called Wagoner, who had returned to her home in Toledo to visit her family before she and Shaffer were due to depart for Miami. Shaffer and Florence went bar hopping, visiting several other drinking establishments and working their way down to the Arena District. At each stop, Two had one shot in each hand of liquor, according to Florence. After midnight, Shaffer and Florence met Meredith Reed, a friend of Florence's, in the short north. Reed gave them a ride back to the Ugly Tuna Saloon where they had started the night and joined them for their last round of alcohol. Shaffer at this time separated from his companions while the three others were there, and then were last seen on security camera outside the bar just about 2 a.m. Florence and Reed attempted to find Shaffer, repeatedly calling out his name. They left with other patrons at the bar after the bar closed at 2 a.m., waiting outside for Shaffer. When he wasn't among the departing crowd, they assumed that he had returned to his own apartment without letting anybody know. Waggoner and Shaffer's father even tried calling him later that weekend, but he didn't answer. On Monday morning, he was missing his flight to Miami, where he and Waggoner had scheduled long before. He was then reported missing to the Columbus Police Department. Now, police began to search for Shaffer at the Ugly Tuna Saloon, the bar where he had been last seen. Since the area around South Campus Gateway was somewhat blighted by high crime rate, the gated building which housed the bar and other businesses had installed several security cameras. They reviewed all the footage that they could obtain, which showed Shaffer, Florence, and Reed going up an escalator to the bar's main entrance at about 1:15 a.m. Shaffer was then seen outside the bar at 1:55, talking briefly to two young women and then waving goodbye, then moving off camera. The camera did not record him leaving shortly afterwards when the Ugly Tuna Saloon closed. This was the last known time that Shaffer was seen by anyone. Now, it was possible, investigators realized, that Shaffer could have actually changed his clothes inside the bar, or had put on a hat or some other disguise and kept his head down, hiding his face from camera. He might have also left the building another route. There was a place off camera, a service store, not generally used by the public, was a short distance from where Brian was last seen. This exit led to a first-floor hallway, which featured access at that time to a construction area with its own exterior exit. Now, some officers believe this would have been very difficult to walk through, even while sober, much less intoxicated as Shaffer was likely at the time. However, the cameras in that area might have also missed Shaffer. One panned across the area constantly, and the other was operated manually. Officers at that time looked at the footage from other bars in the area to see if cameras could then explain how Shaffer had left the Ugly Tuna Saloon. However, all the footage that they gathered from the cameras at 3 nearby other bars showed no trace of him. Search began to fan out from the Ugly Tuna Saloon with officers, sometimes accompanied by police dogs, looking closely into the street, inspecting dumpsters and other waste containers, asking residents if they had ever seen Shaffer. Flyers bearing his picture showed a tattoo in his upper right arm of his stick figure logo with a cover art from the single Alive by Pearl Jam, one of his favorite bands, and noting a distinctive fleck in one of his irises, were widely posted all around the area. Police even pursued the city of Columbus to let them into the sewer system and even search there. No useful information was uncovered. At Shaffer's apartment on King Avenue, 6 blocks from the bar, his car was still parked outside. Inside, nothing was amiss. After searching miles away from the Ugly Tuna Saloon in every direction, police began considering other possibilities besides an accident or foul play. Since Shaffer's mother had died recently, it was also suspected that he had gone away temporarily to grieve in solitude. Yet his disappearance proved permanent. No evident reasons appeared for him voluntarily disappearing. Those who had seen Shaffer that evening, including his father, were asked to take a lie detector test. He and Reed passed theirs, as did all the other ones. However, Florence refused. 2 women Brian had last been seen talking to were also later identified, and they said in 2009 that they had never asked to take one of themselves. Waggoner called Shaffer's phone every evening before going to bed a long time after his disappearance. Usually it went straight to voicemail, but one night, in September, it rang 3 times. Her quote said, "I kept calling it to hear it purely. because it was one of the best sounds I had ever heard, even if no one picked up. This was obtained from her MySpace page. Singular, at the time, Shaffer's wireless provider, said that Waggoner heard that maybe due to a computer glitch that she was able to hear the ringing. However, a ping from the phone was detected at a cell tower in Hillard, 14 miles northwest of Columbus. Police received many tips, none of which resulted in the breakthroughs of the case. And at the Pearl Jam concert later that year in Cincinnati, lead singer Eddie Vedder took time between songs to ask for tips on Shaffer's disappearance. None were useful. Possible sightings in Michigan, Texas, even Sweden were investigated. Randy Shaffer, who had recently suffered the death of his wife, continued to search for his son on his own. Even so desperate to go to a psychic he consulted told him that Shaffer's body was in a body of water near a bridge pier. He and Derek, Brian's younger brother, along with some other citizens who had been interested in the case, bought waders and spent much of their free time along the shores of the Olentangy River, which flows through Columbus adjacent to OSU campuses, searching in vain for bodies near bridges. The possibility also led police to briefly consider a heavily disputed smiley face murder theory. Columbus police eventually rejected any connection to the alleged killer in Shaffer's case, following the lead of the most law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, that had looked into it. To go off on a brief tangent, the smiley face murder theory, also known as smiley face murders, the smiley face killings, or even the smiley face gang, was a theory advanced by retired New York detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, as well as Dr. Lee Gilbertson, a criminal justice professor and gang expert at St. Cloud State University. It alleges that 45 men found dead in bodies of water across the southern or several Midwestern American states from the late 1990s to the early 2000s did not accidentally drown, as concluded by law enforcement agencies, but who are, however, victims of one or multiple serial killers. The term smiley face became connected with the alleged murders when it was made public to the police that had discovered graffiti depicting a smiley face near the locations of where they think the killers dumped the bodies of at least a dozen cases. Gannon wrote a textbook case study on the subject called Case Studies of Drowning Forensics. The response of law enforcement investigators of other experts had been largely skeptical. Now, other police forces that have investigated the deaths dispute the conclusion that the cases were linked. Now, police departments all around were involved did not currently view the deaths associated with smiley face presented at any of the other scenes as serial killer activity. The La Crosse, Wisconsin Police Department, for example, which was in charge of 8 of these investigations, concluded that the deaths were accidental drownings of inebriated men and stated that no smiley face symbols were found in connection of any of these cases. The Center of Homicide Research also published a research brief that attempted to scientifically refute the theory. In March 2009, Lee Gilbertson voiced his support for the theory on an episode of Larry King Live, where he alleged the murders were discussed. Criminal profiler, however, Pat Brown, calls the serial killer theory ludicrous, arguing that evidence does not fit what is known about these serial killers. Brown also believes that the smiley face images found at these cases are likely nothing more than coincidences based upon guesses as to where the body's entering the water, with the smiley face graffiti only found after a wide area search. Quote, "It's not an unusual symbol. If you look in any area 5 square miles, I bet you could find a smiley face," Pat Brown stated to the City Pages newspaper. Gilbertson and Gannon have disputed the idea that the smiley face graffiti was commonplace, saying they examined many areas nationwide and that they were not associated with the suspicious deaths and rarely found smiley face images. Back to the Shaffer story, in September 2008, after a heavy rainstorm, Randy Shaffer was clearing debris in his yard in Baltimore, Ohio home. A branch flew off a nearby tree and unfortunately fatally struck him. Neighbors found his body the following day and called the police. After his obituary ran, A condolence book was posted. One of the signatures in it read, "To Dad, love Brian." This suggested Brian might have left Columbus to start a new life elsewhere. However, upon further investigation, the note was found to have been posted from a computer accessible to the public in Franklin County, which is determined to be a hoax. Now, shortly after Randy Shaffer's death, Neil Rosenberg, attorney for Florence, wrote to Don Corbett, who was a private investigator who had volunteered his time to help the Shaffer family find Brian, regarding his client's ongoing refusal to take lie detector tests. Rosenberg implied that he had learned that the Columbus police investigating the case believed Shaffer was alive. He said, quote, "If Brian is alive, which is what I'm led to believe after speaking to the detectives involved, then it is Brian and not Clint Florence who is causing his family pain and hardship. Brian should come forward and end this." Rosenberg wrote this and maintained that he and his client had nothing to hide. Had already shared everything with what he knew from the beginning, Rosenberg did not see the value in Florence doing so again. Rosenberg's assertions notwithstanding, many of who were close to Brian Shaffer have criticized Florence for not being forthcoming enough. As soon as the detectives started getting involved, that was pretty much had no contact with anybody, recalled Derek. Having also thought that he definitely had knows something, just won't come forward with this. He believes it is still possible that Shaffer is alive, and Florence knows where he might be found. If Brian did take off somewhere, it's that, in this case, we just always had a strong feeling that Clint would possibly know that. Waggoner also thinks that Florence is withholding information, but believes that it's likely her former boyfriend is dead and did not run off. Her sayings on it says, "I can't believe he would just done that." In 2014, Columbus police said they were still receiving at least 2 tips a month on the case via the local Crime Stoppers hotline, though none had proven useful. The evidence in the case filled 4 boxes of files. One of the original investigators, Andre Edwards, told Columbus Monthly that after an extensive review of the camera footage at the Ugly Tuna Saloon from the night Shaffer had disappeared, which was intended to rule out the idea that he could have just left in disguise, he could say with 100% certainty that Shaffer did not leave via the escalator. Police say that they have 3 theories on the case, but decline to discuss them, even generally, with any publication or magazine. In 2019, an image of an alleged American homeless man in Tijuana, Mexico, bearing a resemblance to Shaffer, began circulating online. Columbus news station 10 TV forwarded the image to the detective in charge of Shaffer's case in 2020. The detective sent the image to the FBI for facial recognition analysis, which ruled Shaffer out as the identity of that man. In March 2021, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation re-released an image of an age-progressed photo of which Shaffer might look like at the age of 42, nearly 15 years after his disappearance. Now, between the time that Shaffer's disappearance and his own death, Randy and the families of other missing adults in Ohio were lobbying the state legislature to pass a bill establishing a statewide protocol for such cases. Now, at the time that Shaffer disappeared, it was left up to individual departments on how to handle such cases, and some felt that investigations into relatives' disappearances had suffered as a result. By the time Randy died, the bill had become law. There is a defunct website that you can find on the Wayback Machine, findbrianshaffer.com, In there, it has information about his what he was wearing, where he was last seen, and they do provide a phone number, which I'll provide now, 1-877-645-TIPS. That's 1-877-645-8477. You can remain anonymous while providing tips. Brian Randall Shaffer was 17 years old at the time of his disappearance. He is 6'2". His weight at the time was 168 to 170. His eyes are hazel. He does have a dot on his iris on his left eye. His hair is brown. He does have a tattoo of a Pearl Jam symbol on his upper right bicep. The last clothes he was wearing was an olive green short-sleeved t-shirt with long-sleeve white shirt underneath and blue jeans. Adidas tennis shoes with a yellow cancer awareness bracelet. If you're interested in some pop culture information about the Smiley Face murders, Gannon and Duarte's investigation into the subject of the 2019 docu-series Smiley Face Killers: The Hunt for Justice aired on the Oxygen television network. Featured 6 episodes focus on cases of young men who had disappeared and whose bodies were found in bodies of water at the time. There was a British detective show, Scott and Bailey, had a series episode based on the deaths and ensuing theory. In 2017, there was a novel, Ill Will by Dan Channon. Features a series of mysterious deaths involving drunk young white men whose bodies were found at the bottom of creeks and rivers. There's an episode of a docu-series, Breaking Homicide, referenced the theory, and a 2020 film, Smiley Face Killers, directed by Tim Hunter and written by Bretton Easton Ellis, is loosely based on the theory. Now, several possible victims. Again, Brian Shaffer was considered a possible victim based on where he might have passed, but that was, again, all speculative from a psychic. Luke Hedler, the Midwest pipe bomber who planted pipe bombs all across the United States, was in the shape of a gigantic smiley face. Brandon Swanson, who disappeared after a student party, and of course the Manchester Pusher, similar alleged serial killer in the United Kingdom. And that concludes another captivating episode, delving into the world of mythical true crime. I appreciate you joining me tonight as we listen to the facts from these true crime tales. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll uncover even more mysteries. Until then, thank you for listening to tonight's episode. Good night.